So we're going to go ahead and get started with our first presenter, Rusty Rozzelle. He manages Mecklenburg County's water quality program with Charlotte-Mecklenburg Stormwater Services. The program is charged with maintaining and restoring the quality and usability of the county's surface water resources, including over 3,000 miles of streams and 2 river basins and 190 miles of shoreline and 3 of the 11 lakes that comprise the Catawba river system. The program partners with the city of Charlotte to assist with their phase 1 permit requirements and is responsible for administering phase 2 permit requirements for the 6 towns in Mecklenburg County, as well as Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools and Central Piedmont Community College. Welcome, Rusty.
Thank you, Greg.
Oh,
my.
Stand in front of the.
Oh, I get
Yes.
right. Stand in front of the camera. So is the mouse hooked up to the advance it? Do you push the mouse? It's on the laptop. Got it. Okay. Well, we're here today to talk about our surface water resources. We call it Stormwater Workshop, which is a little bit confusing, but we're really here to talk about our creeks and lakes, our water resources, and stormwater is what impacts those resources the most. So the real subject is water quality. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what our water resources are in our region. What do we do to protect them? And then some challenges and opportunities going forward, which there are a lot of them. And our water resources, if you didn't know this may be the most important thing you can learn here today. They are our most precious natural resource, our most precious natural resource. They sustain our communities. And it's not by accident that they remain good. Right now we have good quality resources for the most part. That's not by accident, particularly going forward. Everybody sees how much growth is occurring all around us with new impervious area added every day. And that impacts those water resources negatively. And we need to be taking very, I think, aggressive measures to try to protect the resources from that development. And we're going to talk about all that today. But since it is our most precious natural resource, you really need to know what area, what resource you are a part of. So these are the 27 jurisdictions that are part of the Stormwater Partnership. They're listed there on the right. And then in blue on this map are the counties where those jurisdictions are located. And then the map also, of course, shows Georgia, Tennessee, North Carolina, Virginia, and the 3 watersheds that these jurisdictions are located in. And you can see that we got Yadkin, Rowan, Cabarrus, and Union that are all part in the Yadkin watershed. And we got a lot of jurisdictions that are in the Catawba, and then one that's in the Broad. So a watershed is the area of land that drains to a particular water body of water. Like if you cup your hand, the watershed line would be the top of your hand, because that's where the water would drain from. So that's what a watershed, also called a basin. And the partnership involves communities that are in 3 different river basins, beginning with the Yadkin. You can see it's up there as to the north of the Catawba and the Broad, and the Yadkin flows in a southeasterly direction and enters the Atlantic Ocean in Georgetown and Winyah Bay. And just south of the Yadkin River Basin is the Catawba, and it flows and also in a southeasterly direction into the Atlantic Ocean, but it joins with the Broad and the Saluda upstream of Lake Marion and Lake Moultrie. And then below Lake Marion and Lake Moultrie is the Cooper River, and the Cooper River runs into Charleston Harbor. So those, and all of these rivers begin up in the Blue Ridge Mountains. So they get a good start, but then they're flowing through quite a bit of an urban area, and these urban areas are negatively impacting water quality. And I thought it's kind of important, so I wrote this down, that we have 8 of our jurisdictions in the partnership that are in the Yadkin River Basin. That includes China Grove, Harrisburg, Kannapolis, Lake Park, Landis, Mint Hill, Monroe, and Statesville. They're located entirely in the Yadkin River Basin. And then we've got most of our jurisdictions are located in the Catawba River Basin, and that would include all of Gaston County, as well as its different municipalities, including Belmont, Bessemer City, Cramerton, Dallas, thought I'd be able to get by without my glasses, but wow, that's a foolish thing to think. Gastonia, Lowell, Mount Holly, Pineville, and Ranlow. And then we have, and that's 12, and then we have 16 that are, I'm sorry, those 12 jurisdictions are located in the Catawba. Then we've got 6 jurisdictions that are located in both the Catawba and the Yadkin. So there's kind of on the line. And that would be Charlotte, Davidson, Hunterville, Matthews, Mecklenburg, and Mooresville. And then we've got one in the Broad, and that's Shelby. So you can see we've got a pretty broad spectrum of participation as part of our partnership here. And all these waters are different. And that's the other thing that's kind of special about a watershed. I know this kind of sounds bad, but I sometimes think of watersheds like feet. So all feet are different. Some feet are the same size, but no feet are the same. You know, some people have ugly toenails, some people have pretty toe, some people have flat feet, some people have bunions. All feet are different. All watersheds are different. They're different for many different reasons, but there's no way, just like you can't buy a good pair of shoes without knowing your feet, you got to know your watershed before you really know how to fix it or protect it. So hopefully that's what we're here today to try to do. But this is a lot of areas, so I'm just going to hit it at a pretty high level, but at least now you know, if you're here, you know which county you're in and jurisdictions, hopefully you know which watershed that you're in. Now, just for your information, these are 3 watersheds, and they span, of course, North and South Carolina, as you can see. But as a whole, the state of North Carolina has 17 watersheds. So this is only a small area of the entire state, but extremely important and probably one of the fastest growing areas, if not in the country, certainly the Southeast. So I mentioned earlier, they're our most important natural resource. So why? We drink it. This is where we get our drinking water. Every jurisdiction represented in the partnership. I went online and I found where you get your drinking water. And every jurisdiction that is in the partnership gets its drinking water from a surface water intake. In other words, a big pumping station that sits on the bank of a surface water body, usually a lake, sometimes a river, and they pump the water out of the water body, treat it, and provide it to its residents. And so the 27 jurisdictions that are in the partnership draw their water from 25 different intake structures. Some of them draw them from multiple structures, some only one. And out of all those structures, 200 million gallons of water, think about that, 200 million gallons of water a day is pumped from those surface water resources to provide the drinking water to over 1.5 million people. That's a huge, huge responsibility. It's a huge benefit. It's our most precious natural resources, bar none. So you add it all up, that's enough water to fill Panther Stadium, 200 million gallons to fill Panther Stadium 1.2 times every day. Every day. That's how much water we pull out of those rivers from those intakes. Recreation is also huge, particularly on the Catawba Lakes, Lake Norman, and all the Catawba Lakes. Estimate about 10 million people visit them every year. It's expected to go up exponentially. And then greenways, people walking along our creeks, enjoying that environment. They're expanding, increasing, and also provide a tremendous benefit to our urban areas. Unfortunately, a lot of our water resources are polluted, already polluted. This is a hard map to see, but you see the red. Those are polluted streams based on state and federal water quality data. They're polluted streams. They're identified as part of the Clean Water Act. So now we're going to overlay the 10 counties that are part of the partnership. It's a lot of streams polluted in those counties and as part of the partnership. And now we're going to overlay the drinking water intakes. A lot of our intakes are drawing water from polluted bodies. Now, the water from those bodies is treated, and obviously they have to be, according to federal law, and they have to meet federal drinking water quality standards. But the thing to really remember, this is very important, and a lot of people don't know this, but we cannot get our drinking water. There's only 2 supplies of drinking water, period. One is groundwater or wells, and the other is surface water. That's it. So groundwater here in the Piedmont of the Carolinas, the yield from groundwater or wells is nowhere near enough to meet the needs of an urban area. You may get on a good well, maybe 50 gallons a minute or 100 gallons a minute. Imagine getting 200 million gallons of water a day pumping at that rate. You just can't do it. There's not enough supply. So we can't use wells. So what does that mean? We're married to these surface water resources and we got to keep them clean. Well, then you may say, well, you know, we got all this technology and we can remove all these pollutants. You're right, you can, but you don't remove them all. Technology is good, but you don't remove it all. And some of the treatment that you use produces byproducts that can sometimes be as deadly as the pollutants themselves. And treatment of water that is polluted is very expensive. It's very, very expensive. And so I've been asked before, well, has anybody ever moved their intake because of bad water quality? Yes, they have. The city of Mount Holly moved its intake, and there was a gentleman by the name of Ed Cross. I don't know if any of you know Mr. Cross. Great guy, works for Gastonia, but at that time he works for the city of Mount Holly, and they were actually upstream of Dutchman's Creek, which comes into Lake Wiley, just upstream of the Highway 27 bridge in Mount Holly, and it's always red when it rains. It's been that way for 100 years. It's just a very unstable stream system. Well, based on the flow, even though they were upstream of that creek, if the flow was not right in the river, sometimes that red water would be pushed up to their intake, and it was so bad they couldn't meet their water quality standards, and they moved it. They moved it just due to turbidity, and they moved it up onto Mountain Island Lake. So it's happened before, and it can happen again. But the problem is we're running out of places to move them. You know, the other thing that we realize is that all these intakes are in close proximity to urban areas. And so if your intake goes bad, then whose urban area are you going to move it to? So you're running out of opportunities. And the other thing is that not only does polluted water result in increased stormwater, increased treatment costs and lower quality of drinking water supplies, but it also greatly impacts the usability of those waters. Like who wants to recreate, swim, or even walk along a greenway in waters that stink or have dead fish in them? You know, it's a bad thing. It's a bad thing for our community to have polluted water. And it's the one thing in a community that a lot of people see a lot of. It's very, I think, telling about the nature of our community. So water resources are just, they are our most important natural resource, bar none. But the problem is that urbanization is the primary source of impairment. And urbanization is the one thing that every community is experiencing right now in and around in this area. So and I call this the urbanization equation. So if you have an increased population, which most communities do these days, then you have more rooftops, you have more sidewalks, you have more roads, you have more parking lots, you have commercial, industrial, impervious area goes up. And as the impervious area increases, so does your stormwater runoff, so do the pollutants in the stormwater runoff, so your volumes and velocities increase. That results in impaired surface waters and increased flooding. And it always adds up to the same thing. So these slides kind of illustrate it. So this is out in our parking lot here. So when it rains, the water from grassed areas flows into a curb typically in an urban area, and then it flows into this catch basin, which has a grate over top of it, and it allows the water to run into the basin, and then it runs into a pipe, and that pipe carries it straight to the creek. And this is an example here of the parking lot on the right, where it runs into that catch basin or that grate and runs straight into the creek. So any gas, oil, antifreeze, tire wear, any chemical product, dirt, bird droppings, human waste, whatever's on the ground ultimately ends up in the water body. That's called stormwater pollution. We also call it non-point source pollution because it doesn't come from a fixed point, rather it's carried to the water body by rain. Bacteria, metals, pesticides, nutrients, hydrocarbons, and sediment from poor erosion control construction sites are our predominant non-point source or stormwater pollutants here in this area. Now here's something that nobody really thinks about. Well, I guess I do, but so if you take an acre of trees here in this region, which this represents roughly an acre of trees, and you put an inch of rainfall on that acre of trees, you know, that raindrop hits those leaves and it settles slowly down to the forest floor where it's soaked up into the ground. There's very little, if any, runoff. Now you cut down that acre of trees and you put an acre of asphalt, guess what? None of that water soaks into the ground, zero. It all runs into that catch basin, into that pipe, and straight to the creek. So that same 1 inch of water that produced no runoff on an acre of trees now produces 27,000 gallons of runoff. That's a lot of water. And that water is going through that pipe, hitting that creek, and the volume and the velocity of the water in that creek is significantly changed. There's a lot more of it, a lot more of it. And what that results is in the creek banks that'll scour out or erode out, the bottom will erode out, and all that sediment is carried downstream, maybe to a drinking water supply. That's what's happening to Dutchman's Creek. This resulting in Lake Wiley being so polluted now. And what ends up happening downstream is a lot of times the sediment will eventually settle out, and it will negatively impact where the aquatic organisms live. This is a mayfly. You know, in a couple of months, we'll have these big old long-legged things flying around our lights outside. Those are mayfly, the adults. Well, the larval stage starts in a creek, and good creeks have mayfly larvae. Well, mayfly larvae are very susceptible to pollution, in particular sediment. And as that sediment settles out onto where they live, they die and they're eliminated. And that's caused a great problem with regards to water quality, because our creeks are supposed to support aquatic life. They're supposed to have life in them. Fish, we can all understand they need to have fish, but the fish have to have something to eat. And that's where the mayfly comes in. They support the fish. So unfortunately, growth is, when it comes to water quality, is the greatest negative impact to water quality in our area comes from increased impervious area, from increased urbanization. And we are experiencing unprecedented growth. I can ride around a year in an area that I've never been in and ride out there, and I don't even recognize it anymore. It's changing that fast. And it is really remarkable. And well, what's happening here? So as you can see, well, my little circles aren't working, but this is growth in the partnership communities over the past 20 years. So starting in 2002 through 2022, and you can see that the fastest growing community for that time period was Union County, had a 78% increase in population. And you can look, as far as a region is concerned, we had about a 50% increase in population. The region right now is the population, when I say region, the partnership for the stormwater partnership has a population about 2.7 million, 1.1 here in Mecklenburg. Mecklenburg County's growth rate over 20 years is 57%. York is 70%. So you can kind of get the picture here that there's a lot of growth. There's a lot of growth that's happened in 20 years. There's been a lot of impervious area added. There's been a huge increase in the water that's running into our creeks and lakes, scouring out those banks and those bottoms and increasing the amount of pollution. But the other thing that's important is, and this is what's a little alarming when you think about it, we got more people needing clean water because we got more people to provide drinking water to, because our populations are increasing. So it's kind of like the perfect storm. You got one banging heads against the other. Well, there's got to be a balance. There's got to be a balance. Come on. Up, see there? Batteries running low. Ooh. My batteries are fine. David? So I mentioned that urbanization is the biggest threat to surface water quality, and more urbanization, the bigger the threat. And we're experiencing right now in our jurisdiction one of the biggest growth spurts that we've ever had. And that, unfortunately, is not being countered with increased controls to protect water quality. So most of the communities around here, we're doing the same thing to protect water quality that we did 30 years ago, for the most part. The state's not changed its regulations really in 30 years. They require basically the same thing. But we're experiencing growth like we never had before. So logic would tend to think, well, maybe we should change some things. Maybe we should be more proactive. Maybe we should be more protective. And frankly, we need to be, if we're going to be able to protect our growing communities from the storm that's waiting right there on the edge to impact our water resources. So to give you an example, okay, this is Mecklenburg County on the left here. Every little red dot represents impervious area. 2 minutes. I'm gonna be late, Craig. Y'all gonna pull me off here? Okay.
Get my ring.
So every little dot represents impervious area, and we have right now in Mecklenburg County about 119 square miles. That's a lot. That's an area the size of the city of freaking Charleston. And that is right about 22.61% and a population of about a little over 1.1 million. And in Mecklenburg County, we're adding 3.6 acres of impervious area every day, which is equivalent to 3 football fields of new impervious area every day. I don't have the data for the other jurisdictions, but I'm suspecting that probably it's just as much, it's just as fast as some of the areas, probably more than 3 football fields added every day. So when you add it all together in Mecklenburg County with 1 inch of rain, remember on the acre of trees, it equates to about 2 billion gallons of water. And that's enough water to fill Panther Stadium. What is that? 6-8 times. And on the total, 44 inches of rain that we get every year creates enough water to fill Panther Stadium 340 times in a year. So that's just a lot of water. It's a lot of water. So what do we do to protect our water resource, our lakes, streams, and rivers from these pollutants and increased volumes and velocities associated with increased impervious area? There's several things. We have what's called stormwater control measures. And these, think of them, I think it's easier just to think of them like a pond. They collect the stormwater and they use various natural processes to remove the pollutants from that stormwater. Sometimes it can be nutrient uptake in plants. Sometimes it can be settling out the particles of pollutants that are in the water. And sometimes it can be chemical processes or other physical processes to remove pollutants. We also, in some jurisdictions, use open space as part of the development, setting aside areas where we don't put any impervious area. And all jurisdictions have stream buffers to some extent as part of their stormwater control measure. And these just areas along a stream bank that are left undeveloped, no impervious area. The water's allowed to filter through those naturally vegetated stream banks, and it helps to remove some of the pollutants. So that's what we use. But this is the challenge. So the state of North Carolina has minimum standards for these ordinances, these things that you have to do to remove pollutants from stormwater runoff. You have to have meet these minimum requirements. And every jurisdiction, I think, in the partnership uses the state minimum, but Mecklenburg County. So we go above and beyond, and by golly good we have, because with all the impervious area that we're adding, our water quality would be much worse if we hadn't. So we have far exceeded the state minimum. And you can too. If you have a stormwater permit, which I think most all the jurisdictions do, you're allowed by state law to have more stringent requirements than the state minimum. And you should. The state minimum requirements have been around for over 30 years, and they've not changed significantly in 30 years. Think of all the other things that have changed. For example, right now, the stormwater rules only require removal of 85% total suspended solids. Well, what about nutrients and a lot of the other pollutants that may not be removed from those when those solids are removed? So you can add into your stormwater ordinance requirement for removal of other pollutants. In Mecklenburg County, we have pollutant removals for nutrients because nutrients is a big concern. Most jurisdictions in the state minimum only require stormwater controls when built upon area exceeds 24%. Well, EPA data been collected for the past 50 or 60 years shows that negative water quality impacts begin when built upon areas of 10%. So what happens between 10% and 24%? There are no controls that are required according to minimum state law. Well, you can lower that percentage. In Mecklenburg County, we've lowered it to 10%. Not many development really occurs between 10 and 24% these days, but in some of your jurisdictions it does. So if you lower it to 10%, then new development would have to put in stormwater controls at 10% and greater, which would do much more for protecting water quality. Buffers typically are 30 to 50 feet. Water buffers are better. You can have water buffers. You can have them as part of your stormwater ordinance. And I think lastly, Probably one of the more disappointing things is that the state legislature, State Law 2018-145, it was Senate Bill 469 that went through back in December of 2018, said that you cannot require stormwater controls on existing built upon area when it is developed. Well, practically all the polluted waters that we have in Mecklenburg County are the result from that existing built upon area. So what that means for us and for your jurisdiction, you'll never make it better because you can never require that be controlled. You can never require that built upon area be treated. So how are you going to remove those pollutants that cause that degradation? Well, right now, the Riverkeeper, the Catawba River Foundation, is sponsoring or working on some legislation, and Ryan Carter's here today. If you have any questions, that he's trying to get that stricken from state law. And for Mecklenburg County, and it is part of it's part of the Mecklenburg County's legislative agenda. So we are supporting that, and it's desperately needed here in Mecklenburg County. If we're to do anything to really improve our water quality, we've got to be able to treat water from existing built upon area when it is redeveloped. And it's much, much, much cheaper to put in these stormwater controls when the redevelopment is occurring rather than waiting till it's happened and going back in and retrofitting. So all those pictures on the right are pictures we took when we tried to go in and retrofit stormwater control measures into the North Cross parking lot up there in Hunterville. Cost 20 times more than it would have cost had they been installed when that parking lot was built. So the point is, you can't really go back and retrofit. It's cost prohibitive. It's much cheaper to put in those controls when the redevelopment occurs. The other challenge is land conservation. You know, these stormwater control measures only remove a percentage of the pollutants, and they fail sometimes. And they also are expensive to maintain, and they have a limited lifespan of about 20 years, and they got to be replaced. The number one best way to minimize control, reduce pollutants associated with urbanization is don't urbanize it. Set it aside as open space, conservation area, conservation easements, and just don't put built upon area in it. And in some places that makes no sense. Like, we're not going to claim Trade and Trine as a conservation area, obviously. But areas out in the rural parts of our county, maybe in areas where they're drinking water intakes, why not? Why not go in and get a grant and buy up some of that land and create a natural conservation area that benefits your community and protects water quality? And that's what we did. This is a slide of the Gar Creek watershed, which is here in Mecklenburg County. It's upstream of Charlotte's drinking water intake. And beginning back in 1970, Mecklenburg County began buying land in that watershed. In total today, we've got over 1,600 acres in that watershed we bought up, setting it aside in conservation area, never to be developed. It's a huge asset to the community, beautiful park, lots of trails. And we also implemented zoning requirements that lots could not be less than 2 acres in size, real close to the water, or 1 acre in size a little further up into the watershed. And as a result of those laws, and those went into effect in 1990, that watershed right now has the lowest percentage of built upon area of any place in Mecklenburg County. It is at 3.6%. And as a result of that, it has the best water quality in Mecklenburg County. There's just no pollutants because they're filtered as a result of the water buffers we enacted there, and there's less urbanization to create pollution sources. And then there's some places, you know, we didn't do this in Mecklenburg County, and we're seeing the impacts. And one of these is Brown's Cove. Okay, same situation. It's a cove. It's on the western side of Mecklenburg County and eastern side. Well, I always get that mixed up. Anyway, it's over there on the river, and it's in the southern part of our county, whereas in Gar Creek is sort of in the western or the central part of our county. And Brown's Cove is located downstream of the airport. It's located in one of the fastest growing areas of our county right now. And we've seen huge declines in water quality in the cove. So I don't know if you can see the cove, but you maybe can see it as that little, anyway, it's down right there. Right there's the cove. And here's the cove. And you can see it's brown. And it's the Beaver Dam Creek watershed, it's Browns Cove. And in this watershed, we've had 118% increase in population. And this is over the past 10 years. And we've had, or 20 years, we've had 121% increase in impervious area, increased sedimentation. We had significantly declining water quality conditions. And in 2016, we removed over 23,000 cubic yards of sediment from that cove that was deposited as a result of poor upstream erosion control at new construction sites. And the thing that I show you this to say, this is an example of where we didn't do enough and the impacts it's having on the cove. And there's about 30 families that live in that cove, and they've seen their water depths decline, and they've seen muddy water and water quality problems they never wanted to see. And they're very upset about it. And this is what can happen if you don't do enough. Now, we did our minimum. Now, remember, our water quality requirements in Mecklenburg County is the most stringent in the state, but we're not doing enough here. And we're looking to see, right now, we're examining the situation much more closely to figure out what we need to do better, because what runs into a cove is different from what runs into a running body of water like a stream. It's different. The point here is, remember the shoe analogy? Okay, you need to measure your feet. All watersheds are different. You need to think about that when you're adopting the regulations. Sometimes you need a little bit more in one area than you might need in another area. A different type of shoe. Maybe you need a cowboy boot instead of sandals, or flip-flops, for heaven's sake. So that's all I went over 10 minutes, didn't I? Okay. So I just wanted to end my message by saying that clean, usable surface waters are essential for sustaining our growing communities. We drink it, and it's possible that it can get bad enough where we don't want to drink it anymore. And then what do? And immediate actions are needed to address the impacts from exponentially increasing urbanization. And hopefully I've made the point. Thank y'all for your attention, and sorry